Sarah Gesereich, on my immediate right, is a principal with 127 Global Strategies, a consultancy that's focused on women's empowerment and gender initiatives. But in previous roles, she served in all of the Department of Education, the Department of Health and Human Services, and was, let me get this exactly right, Senior Coordinator for Gender and Equality and Women's Empowerment at USAID. So she knows a little bit about these topics. Graham MacMillan is president of Visa Foundation. He was recruited to lead Visa Foundation 3 years ago from the Ford Foundation, and previous to that, he was at the Citigroup Foundation. This is a foundation, big company foundation player of size, and running a huge 500 million plus grant making investing strategy for Visa. And then finally and lastly is my colleague from Opportunity International, Simona. Haiduc is a 20-year veteran of our organization. She's managing director responsible for corporation and foundation partnerships. In her 20 years at Opportunity, she's ascended from one role to a next to her current role on the senior leadership team. Simona is Romanian by birth. She's lived in the U.S. for 20 years, but this is a woman who is totally global with millions of airline miles and, dozens of trips to Africa, India, Latin America, et cetera. So this is a panel, I think, that can talk at some length, but we're going to get into it right now. I'm going to sit down and start asking some questions. Okay, first question's for Sarah. Sarah, from your experience.
Lower left-hand corner.
Oh. Thank you. Sarah, from your experience, could you talk a little bit about where we are in developing country gender equality and how we can make progress from here?
Thanks, Randy. It's great to be here. Thanks, George, for bringing us all together on this important topic. And I've been excited to see that gender has been a focus throughout the different panels, and so that's really, really encouraging. There's other good news. So many national leaders and the private sector and donors and many other folks, they have renewed their pledges to advance gender equality and empower all women and girls because they know that it's the best investment that can be made to eliminate all forms of poverty, to build thriving economies, to ensure that there's a more prosperous and stable societies, and it really does unlock that human capital on a transformational scale. It's no longer seen as a social side benefit. Folks understand it's intrinsically linked to those development goals that we have set. And, women are active participants in this. They are leading reforms in their countries. They're leading reforms in their communities. I come from pioneer stock, I guess. My great-grandmother, they were pioneers in Nebraska in the late 1800s. But I've now met modern pioneers. I've met Afghan women and Afghan girls who braved school and sports. And I've met African farmers who took small startups and now are running very large, thriving businesses on the continent. And over the last 10 years, we've seen some great progress. There was progress made in women's economic empowerment. There were strides made in maternal health and in girls' education. But despite some of this progress, women and girls are still facing persistent challenges. The global shocks that we've experienced in the last couple of years, particularly around climate, pandemics, and conflict, those disproportionately affect women and girls. During the pandemic, violence against women and girls, it intensified. Child marriage, which was actually on the decline, began to increase. And women lost their jobs and lost their businesses at a greater scale than their male counterparts. In so many parts of the world, women and girls navigate very complex, mistaken perceptions. Some of it is stigma against educating girls, biases against women-led businesses, and also mistaken perceptions that women are riskier investments than their male counterparts. Discriminatory laws and harmful cultural practices such as unequal property rights and inheritance rights, and child marriage and gender-based violence, often happening within the home. These work against women's ability to thrive and to succeed. But women and girls face all of these things not as separate threats, but more interrelated problems and challenges that they manage through in their daily lives. So how do we get it back on track? I know we're going to hear about some great ways that the Vies Foundation and Opportunity are helping us get back on track. But first, I think we need to continue to focus on promoting women's individual agency. When women have economic opportunity, they can make the best decisions for themselves regarding their health care, regarding their safety, regarding their education, and those of their children. To do this effectively, we have to be intentional and thoughtful about how we address gender barriers across all sectors, whether it's economic empowerment, eliminating gender-based violence, climate adaptation and resilience, technology, health, democracy, and human rights and food security, and the list goes on. I mean, you know what those sectors are where this can be done. It also requires an integrated approach. That's more effective than one that just focuses on gender as the end goal in and of itself. It reduces the likelihood that gender will be sidelined because of other important issues. I also, in my work at USAID, I really came to understand why we have to have an inclusive and localized approach, engaging women from underserved groups such as women with disabilities or indigenous peoples. And we have to have women at the table helping us put together and design the programming and those investments, and understand that they're just as complex as anybody else, and they may have different needs or different vulnerabilities or different discriminations against them based on their age, their geography, their migrant and refugee status, and so on. I also believe wholeheartedly, and this panel is going to demonstrate that today, that a collaborative approach is necessary. Our investments are much more effective when we have a broad range of stakeholders and innovative partnerships that include government and private sector and faith and community-based organizations and academia. And in partnership, these can leverage their distinctive value add. Governments can enact laws that create an enabling environment for women to fully participate in. Also, they can help enact laws for equal rights. The private sector is also really innovative and much more flexible, and they have more resources to really to provide that opportunity for women beyond what governments can provide. And they can address the barriers that limit women's access to economic opportunity. And then additionally, exemplary organizations like Opportunity International, they're on the ground, they have the experience, they have those trusted relationships, and they have reach in the communities where they're engaging. And, women must be equal partners in crafting the laws and the policies and the budgets. That's both in the private sector and the public sector. And this combination is a way to accelerate progress on those SDGs and beyond. When we access women's talents, their innovations, their networks, I believe that those development goals are well within reach. And so I'm looking forward to hearing from Graham and Simona today about those practical ways that you are investing in gender-smart solutions.
Thanks, Sarah. Melinda Gates famously said, "We can't just talk about empowering women. without actually making sure they are gaining power in their families and in their communities. So Graham, we know that at the Visa Foundation, you're focused on women gaining power. So from your perspective as a major investor in gender equity, what are some of the interventions and work that's most important?
Well, thank you for the opportunity to be here. I'm struck by the gavel, and I kind of feel like nobody should ever put a gavel near me. It's an august room, and the history of rooms like these and in the building really speak to why we're here, and the framework that are the SDGs. Visa Foundation is a rather new organization. Obviously, I would assume most of you are familiar with Visa, the company, and we are the corporate philanthropy of the company. But we were established roughly about 6.5 years ago, so it makes us rather new. We're a bit of a startup. And when I joined to be the president, the objective that was laid out was support for small and micro businesses, driving a more inclusive economy through that. And really our role as the foundation is to help support Visa's corporate purpose, which is uplifting everyone everywhere through financial inclusion, supporting small businesses and communities. And so the role that we have is rather natural. But then to your point, well, how does that manifest, and why am I here? Upon my arrival, it was this mandate of having small and micro business be our North Star was more of a market segmentation exercise, and it wasn't an expression of values. And really, very early on, it became quite clear that what was core to who we are as a company and our 26,000 employees is representing those that do not have a voice and that can't participate. And it became very clear that a focus on gender as well as underrepresented groups through the expression of equity was really what should become our evolved North Star. So over a period of time, we spent a fair amount of effort engaging around that strategy and really developing the necessary tools to advance that work, recognizing, of course, that the scale of the challenge far exceeds one institution's ability to meet that challenge. But along the way, what we were able to accomplish and what manifested in a commitment that I'll share a bit more about was an ability to not only deploy grant capital, of course, which many of you in this room are familiar with, but also to actually invest to advance our mission. We are an endowed foundation, rather unusual for corporate foundations to be structured that way. So we have an ability to think more long-term and to use our financial assets to advance the mission and focusing on small and micro businesses. So that's sort of the stage setting, if you will, of what we were teeing up going into the spring of 2020. And then a little thing happened along the way, and it was a question, oh my goodness, what are we going to do now? The world is very different. And so there were a few meetings, I remember them distinctly, with the leadership of the foundation and the company about what should we do. We were going to make this commitment to support focus on women and underrepresented groups in small business. Does that need to change? And it really actually was a pretty simple answer. No, in fact, it's exactly what we should be doing, because we knew that the implications of this pandemic would be most felt by those that have historically been left behind or excluded or extracted from. And so while we, yes, responded with the emergency sort of frontline health worker support, what we also did was send a message to our partners, both existing and future, that we are here for the long run and that we are fundamentally about working to deploy capital in support of small businesses led by, run by, owned by women and people of underrepresented populations. Because, in fact, as I said, they're the ones that will be most impacted. So what does that mean, and where are we today? So that was roughly 2.5 years ago. And we made a commitment to launch an initiative which we call our Equitable Access Initiative, which is a $200 million 5-year commitment to support small micro businesses, deploying about $140 million in private market capital and $60 million in grant support to NGO partners. And that was a grand vision for us. We were a startup, and it was the headwinds of a global pandemic. But the story thus far, and again, we're halfway there, is that we've deployed and I want to spend more time focusing on the investment side because of the crux of your question. We've invested $100 million in that 2.5-year period into intermediaries or fund managers. So we do not do direct investments into small businesses. We don't have that capacity. But we also believe that there's a ripple effect when we invest in partners. We have deployed that $100 million, 100% of it, into funds or other intermediaries controlled by women and or underrepresented individuals. And why does that matter? Well, ultimately it matters because what matters is the power and agency one has when they control capital. That is our theory. There are a whole lot of other issues. You laid them out. This discussion today lays them out. But for us, being focused and having a theory of change is fundamentally about control of capital. And I know many of you are familiar with the statistics broadly, but I'll speak to the United States. Of the roughly $70 trillion in wealth that exists in the United States, give or take, this is a GAO study that was done some years ago, 3% of it is controlled by women and 1% of it is controlled by people of color. You cannot have power and agency if that is all the capital that you control. So ultimately, who writes the checks? So we invest in intermediaries that are run by women and people of underrepresented groups. One example is Beacon Fund, which is a fund based out of Vietnam, run by Xuyen Tang. She is a very experienced investor who launched this fund because she saw an opportunity to invest in growth businesses that are led by women in Vietnam, the Philippines, and Indonesia, but they couldn't get access to working capital just to finance their operations. So she created this fund. It's a 10-year evergreen structure. We were one of the first institutional investors in, and now she's raised many millions of dollars more. I think she's on her way to $50 million close, and that's an example. Adesua Rhodes, an amazing investor, Nigerian who was living in London as an investment banker, wanted to go back home to Nigeria, saw a huge opportunity to invest in, again, high growth enterprises in consumer technology in Nigeria. And yet she struggled tremendously to raise initial first capital because she was considered a first-time fund manager and all the biases that go into that. Well, Adesua has done an amazing job in Arua Capital's management's launch, and we were her first institutional capital in. She's going on to a $50 million first close. So these are just two examples of what we've been able to accomplish. I'll just finish up before turning it over to Simona by saying, we have to measure a few things, of course, because the foundation operates in the context of Visa, and the following is what we measure on the top end. It's the amount of capital that we deploy in grants and investments, but it's also about the number of small micro businesses that we reach. But it's fundamentally revenue change affected by the partners that we support and the number of businesses created and or sustained. So those are our KPIs. But the thing that we do, and this is where about partnership and organizations like the United Nations and others, where frameworks matter, like the SDGs, and we use the 2X Collaborative, which you would be familiar with as the sort of the measurement framework where we analyze any partnership that we go into. If you're not familiar with the 2X Collaborative and the framework that it represents, I'd suggest looking at it because it's our guidepost to everything that we do. So I will pause there, and thank you for the opportunity to share our story.
Thank you, Graham. And finally, Simona, from your wealth of experience of 20 years, what are examples of programming and work that's really meeting the needs of women?
Thank you, Randy. Every time I get a chance to speak on platforms like this, I get a deep sense of responsibility because I'm not just representing the work that Opportunity International, our organization, is doing and implementing in the developing world, but I'm also representing the voices of our clients, our women clients, who don't get a chance to be here today to share their own personal journeys and stories with you all. But they're amazing stories, and we're all just in awe of serving them and inspired by them every day. The most important thing for us at Opportunity International, as we think about investing in women and in women entrepreneurs, because we're talking about economic investment, is that when we invest in women and their businesses, we actually feel that we invest in their families, the entire family, their businesses, their communities, and women become these agents of change in their communities. And for us, at the end of the day, the end goal is building prosperity, creating those economic engines at the local level, at the roots level, where then communities can really flourish and take care of their own issues. With that end goal in mind, we design programs and solutions, of course, that address the specific challenges that women face. And Sarah spoke at length about some of the key challenges that we see, especially when it comes to access to capital, access to knowledge, to be successful in business and running businesses. There's a digital divide between men and women and women and men, and there's significant research and data that backs that up. So at Opportunity, we try to have a focused approach, and we do three key things. We deploy strategies and interventions to make capital flow in the hands of women and our women entrepreneurs, so that's the access to capital piece. We support women with wraparound services in terms of training and build their capacity to really understand what entrepreneurship is about. And please know that in some of these communities, women would prefer to get a job, but there's no jobs available for them. So the entrepreneurship is their only opportunity and chance of making a living and putting food on the table. And then the third piece is access to buyers, access to markets, because whatever they produce, whatever they generate, there needs to be a buyer at the end of the day who pays them for the work. And perhaps the best way to illustrate the work and take it from the theoretical more into the space of, this is how it feels like. I should share the story of one of our clients. Linda is her name. She lives in Accra in Ghana. And again, Opportunity International is focused on global poverty, so international work only, not in the United States. So Linda is a successful woman entrepreneur today. She is a baker, has 2 bakeries. She's the employer of 67 people and has 3 kids. They all go to school, and she's got to be a success and a role model in her community. But her journey has been a pretty difficult one, and one that started with losing her father at the age of 13. She had to drop out of school and support her mother in raising the family and putting food on the table. Didn't have any type of assets. Her mom and Linda were pretty much living in a rented property. Didn't have any real means of making a living. And the only real skill that they had was they knew how to make bread. So our entrepreneurs, our women entrepreneurs, are so resourceful that from that one skill, that one idea, they started a business on the side of the street in Medina Market in Accra, where they started baking bread. They were selling 40 loaves of bread every day, but there was demand. They could make more, and they couldn't get the capacity up. They could not get the capital because they were locked out. They didn't have the assets. They didn't have the collateral to guarantee for a loan. They didn't have the knowledge on how to ask for capital to go into their business. They didn't have the means of getting to the places where they could get alternative forms of capital. So this is when opportunity gets into the lives of Linda and her mom. And with our support and really the support that opportunity provides to the women entrepreneurs is because of partnerships with corporations and foundations and donors. We mobilize grant funding that we use as incentives for the financial institutions to actually serve the women clients we care about. So we find the financial institution partners where we deploy funding in the form of guarantees, collateral buy-downs, all sorts of other financial innovations and instruments so that the capital actually ends up flowing into the hands of Linda. So Linda was able to qualify because she was not asked for the 20% cash down guarantee collateral. She was able to qualify for the loan and was able to buy 3 more ovens, and then she was able to produce a lot more and then expanded and grew into 15 other markets and so on and so forth. And then we brought in the digital innovation into the life of Linda. She didn't have to go to the branch to transact. She was able to move money on her cheap phone in the market from her mobile money account into the bank account and vice versa, cash in, cash out, make the payments right there in the market at the mobile money agent. So these are just some innovations that we've deployed in serving women entrepreneurs like Linda, but opportunity over our 50-year history that Randy talked about, we ended up deploying over $19 billion in capital into the hands of women and women entrepreneurs like Linda. And we see tremendous transformation. We see them gaining or creating employment for their families and their neighbors. We see them improving their conditions, their health conditions, their housing. But most importantly, our clients send their kids to school, and we see education as the key enabler in ending the generational poverty. And then the other specific things that we did at Opportunity, we said, okay, just sector agnostic finance is not enough. We really need to look at what are the key assets, what are the key sectors in the countries where we work to really amplify the flow of capital into these important sectors so that we generate more economic growth. And for us at Opportunity, those are agriculture and education. And so today we're the global leader in unlocking capital into the affordable private education sector. And we're a leader in agricultural finance at the smallholder farmer level, and we've done significant work there. I think I'll stop there because I can go on.
I know you can, Simona, and we have to depart the stage, but we've covered a lot of ground. Sarah set the stage very well. Graham was really illuminating in his description of how the pandemic changed and really reinforced. It didn't change the mission. It reinforced the mission and ingrained their mission to serve women and underserved groups. And then Simona gave you, us some stories right from the heart. So at Opportunity International, we want to encourage women. We want to enable women. We want to empower women, but most of all, we want to convey power to women.